Last week, I was visiting my brother up in Connecticut, and out on his patio, he has this little gazebo thing. And inside, he's got a live edge dining set. This slab construction is perfect for outdoor eating. It's rustic and solid, and even after years of sitting outside, it's held up great. Well, mostly. There is this enormous crack in the top of the table. The crack has been there for years, but it mysteriously doubled in size just this summer. And since I was visiting anyway, my brother asked if I could take a look. Now, I am kind of on vacation and not really looking to get into a big project. So I thought I'm going to throw a couple of big pipe clamps over the thing, put some wood glue in the split, crank that sucker closed, and that'll be good. And that is a good plan. There's just one problem. That split will not move at all. I am putting my maximum strength into this, and I can barely shift it. I definitely can't close it. But why is that? This table is just a big piece of flat sawn lumber, and it wasn't kiln dried. It was seasoned outside for less than a year, so it's still pretty wet in the middle. When the weather is dry, the wood loses water and shrinks. When it's humid, the wood absorbs water from the air and expands. And it goes on like this, season after season, shrinking and expanding as the humidity changes. And this would all be fine, except there's this huge knot right on one end, and it isn't expanding and contracting with the rest of the wood. It pretty much doesn't change, and the rest of the wood is changing around it. So this little part is off on its own, expanding and contracting until, well, you get the idea. This is why I can't close that split with hand pressure. There is an enormous amount of tension in the wood. It had to split to release all of that pent-up energy. If I force that split closed, well, it's just going to crack someplace else. What I need to do is stabilize the split and kind of smooth things out so my brother and his family can get back to enjoying their table. And right now, everyone on the internet is thinking, butterfly key!
Wow!
And yep, that's the standard repair. Except the surface of the table is very uneven. So getting those butterflies leveled would be tricky. I also showed my brother a picture of a butterfly key repair, and he was like, meh. He really wasn't into it. He just wanted something that would fix the table without really changing the way it looked. And I can understand that. So let's start by stabilizing that split. I borrowed a couple of sawhorses from my dad and padded the tops with scrap cardboard. Then my brother and I flipped the table over so I could work on the underside. The basic plan here is to glue in oak dowels that run through the split and tie the two halves together. I'm using a spade bit, and these have a long spur at the end. So it's best to start the drill more perpendicular until the bit gets going, and then drop the drill down to the angle I need. As I drill, I'm keeping my left hand on the underside to make sure I don't drill right through the tabletop. This sounds dangerous, but it really isn't. Spade bits aren't that sharp, and I'm going very slowly. Out of the 4 holes I drilled, one of them did poke through, but I felt it instantly and pulled back before it did any damage. Now I need the dowels, so I'm testing each one in its hole, marking it, and cutting them to length. Of course, I'm not in my shop, so there's a lot of improvising in this project. I only brought one saw with me, the Vaughan Bear Saw. It's my absolute favorite grab-and-go saw, especially when I'm not sure what I'll be doing. I'll put a link to it down in the description. This is a pull saw, so I need to brace the work, but the underside of the table gives me a bunch of convenient stops to grab the dowel while I cut it. The dowels are all different lengths, so I number each one and write the numbers on the tabletop. This way, I can't get confused during the glue-up. Now, anytime we're connecting 2 pieces of wood with a dowel, we can run into a problem, especially if there's a really tight fit between the dowel and the hole. So, as I put this dowel in here and pull it out, listen. Did you hear that? That popping noise, that's an air seal. And that's a real problem because we're about to add glue. So watch what happens when I put a layer of really thick wood glue on here and try to put that same dowel in that hole. It doesn't want to go in at all. And you can see bubbling around here. It's only gone in like a ½ inch. Now I'm going to hit it with a hammer, and it's going in super slowly, but it's even bouncing back and fighting me a little bit. What's happened here is I've created an air seal and there's compressed air inside the joint. And this is really frustrating because that air can get so compressed it'll actually kick the dowel back out of the hole again, even if you're hitting it with a hammer. When you're assembling wood with a dowel and you've got a tight fit, this is a problem you really have to watch out for. To avoid this problem, I'm going to cut a slit down the side of each dowel. And I'm not going to do that freehand with a razor-sharp saw. Luckily, my dad had a pair of these old wood screw clamps in the barn, and I used them to improvise a quick vise. I can get a good grip on these little pieces, start the cut on the corner, and slowly draw that groove all the way down the side. Honestly, getting it started is the hard part. Now I've got sawdust everywhere, including down in the split, where I really don't want it. My dad brought his compressor over, and we had everything cleaned up in a few seconds, and I'm ready to install these dowels. Each dowel gets a generous coating of glue, and then I rotate the dowel into the hole, so more of the glue gets carried with it. I was worried that the very bottom of the hole wasn't getting enough glue, so I put a little dab on a stick and pre-glued the inside, just to be safe. We gave the dowels half an hour to dry, and then I flush cut them. The bear saw is thin and flexible, so I don't need a separate tool. I only brought one chisel with me, but it's all I need to pare those dowels perfectly flat. If you run your hand across the underside of the table, you can't even feel them. And here's a shot from the inside. The dowels are nicely seated in both halves of the table. I'm happy. Time to fill the split and give the table a nice surface. We flipped the table back over, cleaned the top with mineral spirits, and I got to work sealing the split with blue tape. We're going to do an epoxy pour from the underside, mostly because the bottom of the table is rough sawn, and it's not smooth enough for the tape to stick to. I can get the tape to stick to the top, so I'm using a lot of it. We're going to end up pouring 8 or 10 ounces of epoxy, and that's a lot of weight for the tape to hold. If there are any gaps, the epoxy is going to leak right out. So I'm being very slow and careful, and using much more tape than I think I need. Now it's time to pour. I'm just using bar top epoxy that you can pick up at any big box store. It's not the greatest epoxy in the world, but it's decent, and it comes in reasonable quantities. My brother and I take turns mixing it, and then it's just a matter of pouring it in small steps. This stuff is thick, so you have to let it settle, add a little, and wait. Eventually, it looked like we couldn't get any more in there, so we went and had lunch. Half an hour later, I went to check on our project, and I found this. God damn it, I will say that as the epoxy dripped out, it left sort of a beautiful little icicle thing. It was really lovely. That was pretty much the only good part. Oh, the epoxy was also right at the point of setting up when it dripped out, so it kind of froze in place, and we actually didn't lose very much. And if you have a leak when you're pouring epoxy, well, the epoxy seals it up, and it's not going to leak the second time. Later in the day, we poured a little more epoxy in there, and that went perfectly. The next day, I was getting ready to come back to Cleveland. Even though the epoxy had only cured overnight, we couldn't wait to peel the tape and see what we had. Honestly, it looks pretty great. Not only did we fill in the split, we also smoothed out the height difference between the main tabletop and the part that's splitting away. In a few days, the epoxy will be fully cured, and my brother will sand the whole top and give it a new coat of stain. The sanding will blend the epoxy in and make the repair seamless. I especially like the end. You can see the repair, but it's a feature. It looks cool. We did have one spot where the epoxy got under the tape. This is probably where it leaked in the first place, and there's some tape inside the repair, but it's close to the surface and I can chisel it out. When my brother sands it, this small spot should disappear. It's annoying that the repair didn't come out perfect on the first try, but when you look at the whole thing, it's a huge improvement. And now, it's back on my brother's patio, where his family can enjoy it. And right now, everyone on the internet is saying, well, wait a second, what's going to happen next year when it dries out some more? And do you think that epoxy is going to hold? And do you think dowels are the way to do it? And what's going to happen when... Look, I don't know. I don't know. I have done slab furniture before. I did kind of a lot of it while I was working for somebody else, but all of that furniture was kiln-dried slabs of hardwood. This is Doug fir, and it was seasoned outside for less than a year. So it's a very different situation than I'm used to. And this was what I thought was the best repair. Maybe butterfly keys are an even better repair, but my brother, the customer, didn't want those. So I think this is the best way to go. And listen, if something does happen, if it self-destructs in some sort of dramatic way, I'll let you know. I'm all about learning, and I'm obviously not afraid to show when things don't go my way. And as I'm closing out this video, I always want to thank my patrons on Patreon. They make all of this stuff possible. And if you'd like to be one of them and get a bunch of rewards, including the greatest woodworking forum on the entire internet, I'm not bragging, it's true, it really is, go on over to patreon.com/RexKrueger and check out the rewards we offer for the people who make these videos possible. I'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.